Members of the day number 2 and 3, and David Cunliffe was speaking, has 5 minutes remaining. The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the Labour Party will be supporting this bill to Select Committee, but it will do so only with the most intense scrutiny being applied at that stage. Mr Speaker, there are many issues that are raised by this very complex set of pieces of legislation. But high in the minds of New Zealanders listening to this debate, particularly those in the South Island, will be the appointment of Mr Simon Botherway as the chair of the establishment board of the new Financial Markets Authority set up under this legislation. And that appointment, sir, has been called into question by the apparent failure of Mr Botherway to make a timely declaration of a possible perceived conflict of interest around his recommendation as chairperson of a Securities Commission committee to place Alan and Jean Hubbard into statutory management along with Aorangi Securities. And it has further, sir, been a matter of surprise to the opposition that the chairperson of the Securities Commission, Jane Diplock, for whom we have high regard, excused that late and, in our view, partial declaration on the grounds that Mr Hubbard's association with South Canterbury Finance, which had earlier put Mr Botherway's brother into receivership, was, quote, ancient history. Well, how ancient was that history? Mr Hubbard tipped all his remaining assets in Southbury Group into South Canterbury Finance to ensure that equity holders did not lose their shirts. He tipped all his assets in, and I understand only a matter of a few days later, a single anonymous letter of complaint was received by the Securities Commission. And on the basis of this single anonymous complaint, they took the unprecedented step of placing Mr and Mrs Hubbard and Aorangi Securities into statutory management, thereby causing a collapse in the inflow of funds into South Canterbury Finance. Now, the Securities Commission said they were not related parties because a legal opinion noted that at the time Mr Hubbard was no longer a director of South Canterbury Finance. Well, technically speaking, that is true, but by a very short margin of time. But in practical terms, the impact was the same. Funds into South Canterbury dried up, they received a credit rating downgrade days later, and the fate of that company was sealed. So, Mr Speaker, the opposition believes two things must now occur. Given the news earlier in the week that the Ombudsman is investigating Mr Botherway's so-called declaration of interest, we believe Mr Botherway must immediately stand aside from the chair of the establishment board and should reconsider any availability should he not be completely exonerated from his suitability to chair the Financial Markets Authority. This is the senior regulator in the New Zealand markets. This is the position that must be beyond reproach, upon which the reputation for the integrity and transparency of the entire market rests. And if New Zealand does not maintain that reputation, all New Zealanders will suffer. Mr Speaker, I regret to hear from a major broker of international investment into New Zealand that he will not allow offshore clients to invest in New Zealand registered vehicles, that he insists they must only invest through Australian-based ASIC regulated vehicles because, he said, and I quote, New Zealand is the coldest banana republic in the world. The coldest banana republic in the world. And if that is the reputation of our markets in the ears of foreign investors, how important, sir, is it that the chair designate of the establishment board should have his name cleared, and the soon-to-be former member for Timaru and Rangitata should listen up. I have had more emails from her constituents in the last week than she's had hot dinners. And they are all saying the same thing, that they will never vote for her or her party again after the actions that this uncaring, improper, untransparent national government has taken in regards to South Canterbury Finance.
I regret to advise the member that his time has expired.